Welcome to lesson number 2 in our series of lessons on education. In this session, we're going to listen to 3 outsiders, 3 people who are not in the administration or teaching roles of educators, and we're going to hear their opinions. That's one of the really nice things about the format in these lessons is the ability to use video to bring in a number of outside people to hear their opinions. Before going on to my February the 3rd talk, which is lesson number 3, let's look and hear what some non-educator commentators have to say. The first speaker is Mark Tucker, a well-known expert on U.S. education and the creator of an organization, NCEE, the National Center on Education and Economy. Mark has been working in education for 30 years, and he is the U.S. expert. He knows more about the U.S. school systems and a tremendous amount about international school systems, and he can bring the two together. I often quote him in my work. The second clip features Dr. Keku. He is an American theoretical physicist, futurist, and popularizer of science. He has a strong message about most advanced degrees in science in this country and the fact that they are awarded to international students. This illustrates the disillusionment that Americans have for not obtaining advanced degrees. The third commentator is one of the world's richest men, Warren Buffett from Omaha. Listen carefully because he's not bombastic, but nonetheless is very critical of our public schools.
Of this conversation. Mark, can I just say in welcoming you and asking you to provide some opening remarks that your thought leadership, your authorship, the way in which you have brought so much to bear in terms of the way in which we can lift the performance of our education system in this country has been a truly remarkable period of time. And now is a moment where I think all of us feel that with this work, particularly directed to leadership, because that's where the change is going to take place. Leaders across the system at multiple levels. And I know that you're going to look forward to the opportunity to explore this with Mark and others this afternoon. So could you please join me in warmly welcoming Mark Tucker.
Thank you, Tony. If you came to this meeting thinking that you were coming to a meeting about school leadership, you're sitting in the right church, but you're sitting in the wrong pew. This is going to be a meeting about leadership for exactly the reason that Tony talked about. But what it's really all about is where this country is relative to other countries in providing education to its kids, and the terrible danger that we are now in. 50 years ago, by common consensus among economists all over the world, the United States had the finest education system in the world, and our workforce had the finest education of any workforce in the world. And according to a lot of economists, the fact that we had the best educated workforce in the world had propelled us to global leadership in one domain after another. In case you haven't heard, that is not where we are now. It is nowhere close to where we are now. And we are in, if you divide crises between the crises that look like the frog slowly boiling and then the frog being whacked off, we are clearly in the first category. Our frog is boiling and it's way into the process. So let me just ask you a few questions. Did you know that in more than 10 countries in the world, the average student graduates 2.5 years ahead of the average high school graduate in the United States? 2.5 years. Did you know that when our high school graduates leave for college, the majority are admitted to what in other countries is high school? It's a high school curriculum that we call college, and we charge college prices to go to. Did you know that students in more than 30 countries outperform our kids in mathematics? 30 countries. Did you know that the millennials in our workforce are performing at the lowest measured level by OECD in their survey of all the millennials in the industrialized countries that they surveyed? Let me just be clear what I am saying here. Our workforce, the kids who have in the last few years graduated from our high schools and will be our next workforce, have the lowest measured level of basic skills of any of the workforces surveyed globally by the OECD. Did you know that over the last 50 years, the performance of US high school students in mathematics and reading, as measured by NAEP, is absolutely flat? Absolutely flat? No movement in 40 years. But during the same period, the cost per student of educating our elementary and secondary students has more than doubled. That's after accounting for inflation. Did you know that 50 years ago, the US had the best educated system in the world, and today we're in the middle of the pack? Some of you, I am sure, sitting in this audience are thinking this is just another guy bashing American education. I don't need this. Where's the door? But look a little closer. I have written over and over again, the problem is not our educators. The problem is the system. We have a system here in the United States that is in pretty much the same design as it was in the 1910s and 20s, designed for a smokestack economy in which most people needed very little more than what we call the basic skills to lead a very successful life in all dimensions. That world, my friends, is a century out of date. But our system hasn't changed. In my view, it is absolutely remarkable that our students do as well as they do in a system that is so poorly designed for the challenges we now face. On the left, you'll see a list of the top performing countries. Why is that list there? It's there for a very simple reason. If you accept the data that I just shared with you, if you think about how far behind we are, the countries that used to be so far behind us, where would you go to figure out how to catch up? Would you go to Mars? Would you go to Venus? Or would you go to those countries? That's what we've been doing for 30 years. As we've watched more and more countries get ahead of us, we have delivered more and more resources to our research team to figure out what the principles are that underlie their systems and the strategies that they are using. Because we think, strange to say, if you want to figure out how to catch up, the place to find out is where they are. So what we found is that the top performers have highly coherent, very powerful systems built on very different principles using very different strategies. Are you surprised?
But it may just be that the idea that for those of us who are Americans, the idea that the choice between a W-2 and a W-9 may just become a different choice in terms of how you add value. But yes.
Yeah, I must disagree with my esteemed colleague here. Okay. First of all, let me say that science is the engine of prosperity. From steam power to electricity to the laser to the transistor to the computer.
That's not true.
We're talking about, hey, can I have my,
Sure.
You had your say, let me have my say.
Yes.
However, the information revolution has a weakness, and the weakness is precisely the educational system. The United States has the worst educational system known to science. Our graduates compete regularly at the level of third world countries. So how come the scientific establishment of the United States doesn't collapse? If we're producing a generation of dummies, if the stupid index of America keeps rising every year, just watch network television and reality shows, right? How come the scientific establishment of the United States doesn't collapse? Let me tell you something. Some of you may not know this. America has a secret weapon. That secret weapon is the H-1B. Without the H-1B, the scientific establishment of this country would collapse. Forget about Google. Forget about Silicon Valley. There would be no Silicon Valley without the H-1B. And you know what the H-1B is? It's the genius visa, okay? You realize that in the United States, 50% of all PhD candidates are foreign-born. At my system, one of the biggest in the United States, 100% of the PhD candidates are foreign-born. The United States is a magnet sucking up all the brains of the world, but now the brains are going back. Right. They're going back to China. They're going back to India. And people are saying, oh my God, there's a Silicon Valley in India now. Oh my God, there's a Silicon Valley in China. Duh. Where did it come from? It came from the United States. So don't tell me that science isn't the engine of prosperity. You remove the H-1B visa and you collapse the economy. In Wall Street Journal, editorialized against a congressman who wanted to ban the H-1B, saying they'll take jobs away from the American people. The Wall Street Journal said, look, there are no Americans who can take these jobs. These are at the highest level of high technology. They don't take away jobs from Americans. They create entire industries. And so that's why we have an Achilles heel, and that's the educational system. And again, sociology majors are not necessarily going to be the ones determining the future of Silicon Valley, but physicists, engineers. We need
parents, and frankly, it takes the interests of the well-to-do in the school system to keep a first-class school system. I've said that to some extent, a good public school system is a lot like virginity. It can be preserved but not restored. You preserve it by having the parents interested and involved in the public school system. It's probably the next to the nuclear, chemical, and biological problem. I mean, it's the number one problem of the country is making sure that the educational system is the best in the world. We've got the resources, and we're not providing it. We're not delivering it. So it's very complicated when you operate through thousands and thousands of school districts, and you work with many, many unions, and you've had, to a great extent, in many areas, the rich opt out of a system and set up a separate system. You know, I am not as concerned about the public golf courses in Omaha as I might be if I played them every day instead of playing at a country club. And if you have a two-tier school system, one for the rich and one for the poor, it's going to be hard to pass bond issues that benefit the people that don't have the money to send their kids to private schools. You know, we've had this great success story in this country, and a lot of it is because of people have had something closer to equality of opportunity in the United States than they've had in most parts of the world. And you do not have equality of opportunity when my kids get to go to some school where I can attract outstanding teachers and where they're in the company of other kids that are also motivated and they're getting encouraged at home and all sorts of other things. And somebody else who is born into a less advantageous family really doesn't have a chance. They go into something that's close maybe to an armed camp and where the teacher...
Clearly, I have loaded the deck by selecting these particular speakers, but I go next and it will even get worse. You might question, why are you so negative? Can we be as bad as you say we are? We can. Just wait for the next lesson. My motivation is focusing on setting the scene for such a bad situation that all of you as citizens will be highly motivated to call for action.